So I think it's time to give a no strings attached basic income program a proper go.
The motion's moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you so much.
It's just so, thank you. What a great presentation. And how this exactly captures the tension I feel between the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation presentation coming before this. And this is not a slight to them or to our own economic development team, but the world reveres economic development. And economic development is important for cities. I wouldn't say any differently, but that is taken for granted. And as we get richer and we celebrate industry coming in more, we're also leaving people behind. And economic development, while it can support individual citizens, of course, that isn't its intention. It just, anyways, it helps the wealthy get wealthier on a broader scale, but still, love our economic development team. So I will move it, and I'll say the remarks that I wrote on the weekend, because I'm not good on off the cuff. Okay, so it's a couple weeks ago before school started, if you can believe it's only been a couple of weeks. I was working in the basement. Well, it was my partner's turn to do the parenting. Other kids at daycare, the older kid and him come home from grocery shopping, and I hear my kid say, "Why do we even have to pay for groceries? If I were president," and rest assured, we have told him many times that there is a prime minister in Canada, but until his teacher tells him the same, he won't believe us. So he said, "If I were president, everyone would eat for free." Adorable, yes. Naive, possibly. But at the core, what he's saying is that we are all inherently and unconditionally worthy of having our basic needs met. And that's exactly what a guaranteed livable basic income is meant to do. By providing an income-tested income top-up to those who need it, more people are able to eat, as we saw in the presentation, as well as put and keep a roof over their heads. Basic income prevents people from falling into poverty, which is good news because poverty has substantial individual and societal consequences. But the benefits of basic income, along with increasing OW and ODSP rates, which this motion also advocates for, and the value of collective responsibilities, putting these benefits into place have notable impacts. As the delegates talked about, there are costs, of course, to administering a program, but there are ways to recover those costs, and there can be cost savings as well. As one example, some of you might have seen the recent article about research out of UBC, where they gave $7,500 to 50 people who were homeless for the past 2 years, and among other benefits that this amount of money provided, it reduced shelter stays, which saved $8,277 per recipient, or a net of $777. Recent modeling, you had the great public health information from Ontario, which is great. The Positive News, which is I don't know if you've ever seen Positive News, but it's just a bunch of good news stories that they collect, recently published a little bit about recent modeling out of the National Health Service in the UK, which said that giving £75, or the equivalent of 125 Canadian dollars, per week, could prevent up to 1 million cases of depression annually, plus up to 1 million more physical health symptoms, which could save the health service billions. And like you said, it's about the cost savings, but isn't it just nice to think that millions less would have depression and significant health symptoms? There's lots of individual and community benefits, like the delegates have noted, so I don't want to just list those. But decreased hospitalizations, improved mental health, improved physical and mental health, and those come from the studies from the Mincome experiment in the 1970s, Manitoba, and from the 1-year pilot in Brantford, Hamilton, Brant County. It makes sense for us as a municipality. It would save costs associated with homelessness and underhousing, social isolation, and alleviate mounting pressures, financial and social pressures that have been downloaded to municipalities where we only have 2 main sources of income. For some context, I got some information from staff, and annually the city invests close to $2.4 million in direct recreation subsidy programs that are generally oversubscribed. And between 2018 to 2022, the city has contributed $1.93 million, or an average of $385,000, and I'm sure that number is just going to keep growing towards direct affordable housing and initiatives. And while I'm not saying a basic income would result in a tax increase to Waterloo taxpayers because of cost savings related to these subsidies, it may allow cities to shift their finances to address other pressing needs. Politically, there's benefits for us too, and I'm almost done, so don't worry. The public supports this overwhelmingly. Ontarians already value social benefits like OHIP, Old Age Security, and the Canada Child Benefit. Personally, I, surprisingly as a city councillor, don't make a lucrative enough salary to not get the Canada Child Benefit, so thanks for that, Canada. It's also lifted nearly 435,000 children out of poverty within its first 4 years of implementation. An Angus Reid report, which council saw because someone sent this to us, demonstrated that in 2020, the majority of Canadians, at 59%, support a basic annual income of $30,000 per person, which is actually quite a high number given the pilot was substantially lower at $17,000 for an individual person. And since this motion went public, I've had a few dozen people reach out to me in support and only one not in favor. So I think it's time to give a no strings attached basic income program a proper go with a fulsome evaluation and alongside an increase to OW and ODSP, which is also way too low, as what great slides they showed us. So people can survive amidst an ever-increasing cost of living, and more than that, so that individuals and communities can thrive. A basic income is anything but basic. Done.
I wanted to thank the Basic Income Waterloo Region folks for their really great presentation. I just wanted to speak a little bit to income inequality in a little bit more detail. We know that per the presentation that was provided today that it's worsening across Canada, including in Waterloo Region. And although Councillor Vasic has some tension with economic growth, high income inequality actually diminishes economic growth in our community as well. And the main mechanism through which inequality affects growth is because it undermines educational opportunities for children from poor socioeconomic backgrounds, it limits social mobility, it hampers skills development. And we also know that income inequality undermines social cohesion in our communities, and that municipalities like ourselves are on the front line of the multiple crises that emerge from these income inequality issues which were addressed, whether those are economic development or mental health or housing and homelessness, etc. And one of the things, as I was looking into this more, that I think is intuitive but interesting to verbalize is that higher income inequality actually makes it more difficult to move outside of the income class that you were born into. And that is really counter to the meritocracy that we sometimes like to think exists in our society. And I would argue that, or the data shows that since 1994, the redistribution effect that federal and provincial governments are supposed to have as represented in income inequality tools has dropped significantly, and that's why we see some of the income inequality statistics that were shared with us today. And the restructuring of many government programs, such as employment insurance, has led to a smaller share of unemployed people getting unemployment benefits. And actually, welfare incomes have fallen since 1994. And as Councillor Vasic noted, and I won't reiterate, but basic income has been successful in the many pilots, and from my perspective, in my opinion, it is time for the federal and provincial government to establish a new government transfer to try and tackle some of these myriad issues that emerge from the problem of income inequality. And I appreciate, really happy to second the motion and appreciate Councillor Vasic putting it forward. Thank you.
The basic income proposal that's been shared with us by Councillor Vasic does align with goal number 1, no poverty. It aligns with goal number 10, reduced inequality. It aligns with goal 3, good health and well-being. And it aligns with goal 11, sustainable communities and cities. And there is definitely a case for local leadership from the City of Waterloo on this particular motion. And so I'd really like to support leadership from the City of Waterloo on this file. Thanks.
Thank you to Councillor Vasic for putting this motion forward, and I think it's one that is well in its time. And thank you also to the delegation for adding some color and some solutions that can go forward with the work that we've done today. And local leaders being able to take this initiative forward. And if we don't start now and begin to work together, we could be having this conversation for years and years and years and years. So I'm glad to see it before us, and I'm happy to be supporting the motion as it's written. Thank you.
It really, truly is important. Just would like to echo people's comments and to say thank you to Councillor Vasic for bringing this forward, and really appreciate the information that you've provided to us today. Thank you.
Seeing none, the motion's moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, Mayor McCabe, and Council. My name is B. Henry, and I'm a resident of Waterloo. Thank you for allowing us to present some information about why a guaranteed livable basic income is so needed at this time. We'll share with you our research on why it is needed, essential, doable, and affordable. This is the definition of a basic income as it comes from Coalition Canada, a group of activists from across Canada who are working to convince politicians that a basic income is an essential pillar in a just recovery from the COVID pandemic. A basic income is a direct payment from government to ensure that everyone has sufficient income to meet basic needs, participate in society, and live with dignity regardless of work status. We're talking today about a basic income guaranteed, or as it is sometimes called, a livable guaranteed basic income, and not about a universal basic income. With the basic income guarantee, only those whose income falls below a specific threshold would receive the money. The amount of the basic income would decrease as other income increases. There are, of course, lots of details that would have to be decided when a basic income is implemented. For example, how much the amount would be and how much it would be reduced as a person's other income increases. Here are some of the reasons that a guaranteed livable basic income is so needed. These bullets are all either indicators of how people fall into poverty or the consequences of living in poverty. They are not new to us. Recent statistics indicate that we have a serious problem in our country, and one for which a basic income could be at least part of the solution. Food insecurity is increasing. The most recent data from the region of Waterloo Food Bank stated that there were 46,000 visits to the food bank in August of 2023, and that is up 35% from August 2022. This shows that people living in our area who are making only the minimum wage are trying to live on an income that is 25% less than what's been calculated to be a living wage. This helps to explain why people who have jobs are visiting the food banks at an increasing rate. They can't cover their basic needs on the income they're making. The increase to the minimum wage as of October 1st will be welcomed, but it will not erase this gap. 1 in 5 children live with food insecurity. Nearly a third of Canadians say they don't make enough money to pay their bills and debts. 46% of Canadians report that they make $200 a month more than their monthly financial obligations. And 52% of Canadians feel they don't have enough money left at the end of the month to save for their retirement. All of this in the midst of plenty. As Coalition Canada said in its report to the Standing Committee on Finance, by tying benefits to conditions such as employment rather than to income, our current social safety net fails to provide adequate support to many Canadians. Employed individuals make up the majority of those living in poverty, about 54%, indicating that participation in the labor market is not enough to lift millions of Canadians out of poverty. This slide shows the considerable difference between what people on Ontario Works and ODSP receive per month and the poverty line compared to the poverty line as defined by the market basket measure. And it also shows the amount that individuals received in 2018 when the Ontario Basic Income Pilot was implemented, and that amount was also below the poverty line, but was considerably more adequate than the social assistance rates. This slide shows a similar situation for a two-parent family with 2 children under 6. The perfect storm of inflation and high prices is driving more people into homelessness. From the comfort of our own homes, it's hard to understand the complexities of poverty and homelessness, but we know that both impact us all. These are only some of the most pressing reasons why a guaranteed livable basic income is needed now more than ever. And I'll now pass it on to Lorna to talk about why it is essential to implement a basic income. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lorna Aberdeen, and our group, Basic Income Waterloo Region, believes a basic income is essential and doable. These are photos by Jesse Gollum for a photo exhibit called Humans of Basic Income. These images tell stories of people that participated in the Ontario Basic Income Pilot Project. The caption for the photo on the left reads, "The Basic Income Program helped us move to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood and feel financially secure enough to go back to school to get a better job." A basic income allows people to participate in the economy and safely live and thrive in their communities. It reduces the financial burden of legal, health, and social services. It reduces homelessness. The Ontario Basic Income Pilot demonstrated improvement in the lives of the participants. Some recent statistics that, in my view, indicate we have a serious problem in this province, and one for which a basic income could be at least part of the solution. For example, between January 2022 and September 2022, the number of people accessing food banks in Ontario increased 24% over the previous year, with 1 in 3 people being first-time visitors. In Toronto, 1/3 of people coming to food banks in 2022 worked full-time, up from about 16% the year before. In Waterloo Region, the number of unique households accessing food assistance increased 57% between January and March 2023 compared to the same quarter in 2022. Stats Canada data showed that the wealthiest 20% of households controlled nearly 68% of the total net worth in Canada in the first quarter of 2023, while the least wealthy 40% accounted for 2.7%. This data, compiled by the Parliamentary Budget Office, shows family net wealth distribution by selected percentiles in Canada for 2019. It illustrates that the top 1% have almost the same amount of wealth as 80% of the population. Basic income decreases costs for legal, health, and social services. One main area of savings is in healthcare. Poverty is a key determinant of health. As we reduce poverty, health improves, which means that healthcare costs would decrease. There would be less mental illness, fewer emergency room visits, and overall better health. This not only makes intuitive sense, it was also shown in the Ontario Basic Income Pilot results. Another area of savings is in policing and correction costs. 80% of crime is related to poverty. And a basic income would vastly reduce the need for food banks and homeless shelters. More recent qualitative data from the prematurely cancelled Ontario Basic Income Pilot indicated reductions in post-traumatic stress and chronic health problems, with almost 80% reporting improved general health. Mental health status is an important component of healthcare costs. The MinCom experiment in Manitoba in the late 1970s showed an 8.5% decline in hospitalization rates, largely due to a decline in mental health issues related to alcohol consumption. Oops, sorry, I missed a slide. So basic income improves lives in so many ways, as you can see by the little bullets at the top there. It gives them us a firm floor to stand on. And a basic income is doable. It can be delivered efficiently, securely, and economically. Government's swift action in 2020 resulted in a substantial decrease in Canada's overall poverty rate. Federal emergency and recovery benefits mitigated the pandemic's impact for lower income populations. And I want to end with a quote from the late Hugh Segal. "The wrong approach is to ignore the problem, letting the ideological conceit that a rising tide lifts all boats obscure the hard reality that many Canadians have no boat or access to anyone who has ever had a boat." Thank you.
Hello, I'm Colleen Cooper from Waterloo, Ontario. And I'm going to talk now about the fact that basic income is affordable, because that's often the comments that we get. Well, this all sounds great, but how can we afford to do this? It has been calculated by people who have a lot more economic acumen than I do, that the cost for a national basic income plan is estimated to be approximately $81 billion a year. And that sounds like a really huge number and may seem like, well, how is that even possible for our country to come up with that? And that these costs would be, of course, ongoing and would continue to be part of the program each year. However, we know that there's about 6 different components of ways that we could generate the income that would cover this huge cost. There are 6 strategies. The first one is implement an annual wealth tax on the ultra-rich. So many statistics were presented today about, that top 2% or whatever of people who control a lot of the wealth. And those households with wealth over 20 million, which includes the top 1/10 or 1% of the households in Canada, if we taxed those in a more efficient way, could yield $70 billion in new tax revenue over 10 years, or $900 million annually. Strategy number 2 is to implement an increase in marginal federal income tax rate for high income earners only. So what this slide is showing is that anyone who makes $214,000 or less in income would not be affected at all by the changes to the Income Tax Act. So that it's only high earners that are going to pay a little bit more of their share. So with all of these 6 different strategies, what we're really talking about here are policy pieces and things that can be implemented to really help generate these funds. The third strategy is to increase corporate taxes for large corporations. And we're hearing a little bit about this now of some of the, the car people are in the news right now, and the grocery stores are in the news, and they're making these record profits while many, many Canadians are suffering in a big way. So in 2010, the corporate tax rate was 18%, and then it was reduced to 15%. So one way to close this loophole would be to reinstate those higher tax rates for large corporations. This would generate $6.2 billion in the first year. So as you can see, we're getting places to get this $8.2 billion from. The other strategy could be to implement an excess profits tax of 50%. And this could generate $8 billion in new tax revenue. So again, I think these are things that we might be hearing about now, just as people are talking more about some of the big profits that are out there. A fourth strategy would be to tackle the web giants. So right now, a lot of the, we all know people buy lots of stuff on Amazon and order from all these different online places, but those revenues don't get taxed in Canada. They stay in the United States or wherever other country these businesses are based. So if we looked at trying to harness some of the tax revenue from all these mega sales, that could also generate new money for us. So implement a 3% tax on web giant sales that do not currently pay corporate taxes on profits derived from business in Canada. This could generate another $600 million annually and rise over time. Tax Canadian spending on foreign digital media. Ensure equitable laws and policies for all web providers. A fifth strategy is to reduce tax havens. So again, I don't know all the details about tax havens, but we all know that they exist. And so what are some ways that we can help to crack down on some of these offshore kinds of things and help generate more revenue here in Canada? Close some of our tax loopholes. So capital gains is another thing that we could increase from 50% to 75%. Again, prior to the year 2000, capital gains were taxed at 75%. That was reduced. Perhaps that's another way to generate some more revenue. Stock options. This can be another loophole. And over 90% of this loophole are benefiting the top 1%, again, of those earners out there. So this might be another way to help generate some funds. And this one I find a little bit amusing at the end, you know, the business entertainment expenses. Eliminate deductions for entertaining expenses for large corporations. And there would be an exception for small and self-employed enterprises. But another argument that people often give us is that, oh, well, when you give people money, you know, there's abuse and, you know, people misuse the funds and things like that. So I think it's really interesting that a distinguished Osgoode Hall tax law professor once quipped about this loophole of business entertainment expenses. There's more tax fraud taking place at one Blue Jays game than all the welfare fraud in Ontario in a whole year. So let's really take a look at some of our policies and see how they could benefit the average person. So this is just a chart that sort of shows the 6 strategies on the left and the potential that the potential amounts of revenue that they could generate. But the one on the far right, the thing that is important in all of this too is that Public Health Ontario has estimated savings in the region of $21.5 billion annually, preventing primary risk factors for chronic disease if we could eliminate poverty. So again, I know it's been mentioned before, but the savings to healthcare costs would be many, and not just the financial costs, but people living happier, more fulfilled, calm lives. I mean, you can't really put a price tag on that. And so in summary, a basic income is needed, essential, doable, and affordable to ensure that everyone has sufficient income to meet their basic needs, participate in society, contribute to the economy, and live with dignity. The most important question we can usefully answer in rich countries is not how to make them grow richer, but how to improve the quality of the life of the average citizen. It may be one of the greatest challenges for our time. We have the resources. And here's ways to get more information if you're interested. So thank you very much for listening to our presentations today.
Thank you very much for your time and sharing the information that you shared.